Will closed the book slowly and sat staring at nothing. He felt as though he had lived for 100 years. To know so much, now to be able to do so many things, should have excited him, but he felt weighed down, melancholy at the thought of all that had been, and all that was to come. Merriman came through the door, and stood looking down at him. "Ah, yes," he said softly. "As I told you, it is a responsibility, a heaviness. But there it is, Will. We are the old ones, born into the circle, and there is no help for it." He picked up the book and touched Will's shoulder. "Come." As he crossed the room to the towering grandfather clock, Will followed and watched him take the key again from his pocket and unlock the front panel. Still there was the pendulum, long and slow, swinging like the beat of a heart. But this time Merriman took no care to avoid touching it. He reached in with the book in his hand, but he moved with an odd jerkiness, like an actor overplaying the part of a clumsy man. As he pushed the book in, a corner of it brushed the long arm of the pendulum. Will had just a flash of a moment to see the slight break in the swing. Then he was staggering backward, his hands flying up to his eyes, and the room was filled with something he could never have afterward describe, a soundless explosion, a blinding flare of dark light, a great roar of energy that could not be seen or heard, and yet made him feel for an instant that the whole world had blown up. When he took his hands from his face, blinking, he found that he was pressed against the side of the armchair, 10 feet from where he had been before. Merriman was spread-eagled against the wall beside him, and where the grandfather clock had been, the corner of the room was empty. There was no damage, nor any sign of violence or explosion. There was simply nothing. "That was it, you see," Merriman said. "That was one protection of the Book of Grammari, since our time began. If the thing protecting it should be so much as touched, it and the book and the man touching it would become nothing. Only the old ones were immune from destruction, and as you see," he rubbed his arm ruefully, "even we, in the event, can be bruised. The protection has taken many forms, of course. The clock was simply for this century, so now we have destroyed the book, by the same means that through all these ages we used to preserve it. That is the only proper manner for using magic, as you have now learned." Will said shakily, "Where's Harkin?" "He was not needed this time," Merriman said. "Is he all right? He looked—" "Quite all right." There was a strange tight note in Merriman's voice, like sadness. But none of his new art could tell Will the emotion that it put there. They went back to the gathering in the next room, where the carol that had begun as they left was only now coming to an end, and where nobody behaved as though they had been away for more than a moment or two, or for any real time at all. But then Will thought, we are not in real time. At least, we are in past time, and even that we seem to be able to stretch as we wish, to make it go fast or slow. The crowd had grown, and more people were still drifting back from the supper room. Will realized now that most of these were ordinary folk, and that only the small group who had remained in the room earlier were old ones. Of course, he thought, only they would be able to witness the renewing of the sign. There were others, and he was turning to study them when suddenly astonishment and horror caught him up out of all reflection. His eye had caught a face in the very back of the room, a girl not looking at him, but busy in conversation with someone unseen. As he watched, she tossed her head with a bright, self-conscious laugh, and she was bent, listening again, and then she was gone, as other guests blocked the group from view. But it had been long enough for Will to see that the laughing girl was Maggie Barnes, Maggie of Dawson's Farm. A century hence, she was not even a foreshadowing of the Victorian Miss Graythorne was a kind of early echo of the Miss Graythorne that he knew. This was the Maggie he had last seen in his own time. He swung round in consternation, but as soon as he met Merriman's eyes, he saw that he already knew. There was no surprise in the hawk-nosed face, but only the beginning of a kind of pain. "Yes," he said wearily, "the witch girl is here, and I think you should stay beside me, Will Stanton, for the next while, and watch with me, for I do not greatly care to watch alone." Wondering, Will stood with him in the corner unobserved. The girl Maggie was still concealed in the crowd somewhere. They waited, then saw Hawken in his dapper green coat thread his way through the crowd to Miss Graythorne and stand deferentially beside her, in the way of a man accustomed to making himself available for help. Merriman stiffened slightly, and Will glanced up. The lines of pain had deepened on the strong face, as if Merriman were anticipating some great hurt about to come. He looked across again at Hawken, and saw his gay smile flash at something Miss Graythorne had said, showing no sign now of whatever had afflicted him in the library. The small man had a brightness like a precious stone that would bring delight to any gloom. Will could see why he was dear to Merriman. But at the same time, he had all at once a dreadful rushing conviction of hovering disaster. He said huskily, "Merriman, what is it?" Merriman looked over the heads of the lively pointed faces. He said without expression, "It is peril, Will, that is to come to us through my doing. Great peril through all this quest. I have made the worst mistake that any old one may make, and the mistake is about to come down on my head full-fold. To put some more trust in a mortal man than he has the strength to take, it is something that all of us learned never to do centuries ago, long before the Book of Grammar came into my charge. Yet in foolishness I made that mistake, and now there is nothing that we can do to put it right, but only watch and wait for the result." "It's Hawken, isn't it? Something to do with the reason why you brought him here?" "The spell of protection for the book," Merriman said painfully, "was in two parts. Will, you saw the first, the protection against men. It was the pendulum, which would destroy them if they were only to touch it, but would not destroy me or any old one. But I wove another part into that spell, that was a protection against the dark. It set down that I could take the book out past the pendulum only if I were touching Hawken with my other hand. Whenever the book was taken out for the last old one, in whatever century, Hawken would have to be brought out of his own time in order to be there." Will said, "Wouldn't it have been safer to make an old one part of the spell, not an ordinary man?" "Ah, no. The whole purpose was to have a man involved. This is a cold battle we are in, Will, and in it we must sometimes do cold things. This spell was woven around me as keeper of the book. The dark cannot destroy me, for I am an old one, but it could perhaps by magic have tricked me into taking out the book. In case that happened, there had to be some way in which the other old ones could stop me before it was too late. They too could not destroy me to stop me from doing the work of the dark, but a man can be destroyed. If it had come to the worst, and the dark had forced me by magic to take out the book for them, then before I could begin, the light would have killed Hawken. That would have kept the book safe forever. For in that case, I could not have worked the spell of release by touching him while taking out the book, and so I should not have been able to reach the book, nor would the dark, nor anyone else." "So he risked his life," Will said slowly, watching Hawkins sprightly walk as he crossed the floor to the musicians. "Yes," Merriman said. "In our service he was safe from the dark, but his life was in hazard all the same. He agreed because he was my liege man and proud of it. I wish that I had made sure that he really knew the risk he ran. A double risk, for he might also have been destroyed today, by me if I had accidentally touched the pendulum. You saw what happened when at last I did that. You and I, as old ones, were merely shaken, but if Hawken had been there, under my touch, he would have been killed in a flash, unbodied like the book itself." "He must not only be very brave, he must really love you, as if he were your son," said Will, "to do things like this for you and the light." "But still he is only a man," said Merriman, and his voice was rough and the pain back deep in his face. "And he loves, as a man, requiring proof of love in return. My mistake was ignoring the risk that this might be so, and as a result, in this room, in the next few minutes, Hawken will betray me and betray the light, and mould the whole course of your quest, young Will. The shock just now of actually risking his life for me and the book of Grammar was too much for his loyalty. Perhaps you saw his face in the moment when I held his shoulder and took the book from its perilous place. It was only in that moment that Hawken fully understood that I was prepared to let him die. And now that he has understood it, he will never forgive me for not loving him as much, in his terms, as he loved me, his lord. And he will begin to turn on us. Merriman pointed across the room. See where it begins. Music struck up brightly, and the guests began forming into couples to dance. One man, whom Will recognized as an old one, moved to Miss Graythorne, bowed and offered his arm. All around them, couples joined into figures of 8. For some dance he did not know. He saw Hawken, standing irresolute, moving his head a little to the beat of the music, and then he saw a girl in a red dress appear at his side. It was the witch girl, Maggie Barnes. She said something to Hawken, laughing, and dropped him a small curtsy. Hawken smiled politely, doubtfully, and shook his head. The girl's smile deepened, and she shook her hair coquettishly and spoke to him again, her eyes fast on him. "Oh," said Will, "if only we could hear." Merriman regarded him soberly for a moment, his face absent and brooding. "Oh," said Will, feeling foolish, "of course." It would take him some time, clearly, to grow accustomed to his own gifts. He looked again at Hawken and the girl, and wished to hear them, and could hear. "Truly, madam," Hawken said, "I have no wish to seem churlish, but I do not dance." Maggie took his hand. "Because you're out of your century? They dance here with their legs, just as you do beyond 500 years. Come." Hawken stared at her aghast as she led him into a set of couples. "Who are you?" he whispered. "Are you an old one?" "Not for all the world," said Maggie Barnes in the old speech, and Hawken turned quite white and stood still. She laughed softly and said in English, "No more of that. Dance, or people will notice. It's easy enough. Watch the next man as the music begins." Hawken, pale and distressed, stumbled his way through the first part of the dance. Gradually he picked up the steps. Merriman said in Will's ear, "He was told that not one soul here would know of him, and that on pain of death he must not use the old speech to any but you." Then the speaking below began again. "You look well, Hawken, for a man escaped from death." "How do you know these things, girl? Who are you?" "They would have let you die, Hawken. How could you be so stupid?" "My master loves me," Hawken said, but there was weakness in it. "He used you, Hawken. You are nothing to him. You should follow better masters who would care for your life and lengthen it through the centuries, not confine it to your own." "Like the life of an old one?" Hawken said, eagerness waking in his voice for the first time. Will remembered the tinge of envy when Hawken had spoken to him of the old ones. Now there was a hint of greed as well. "The dark and the rider are kinder masters than the light," Maggie Barnes said softly in his ear as the first part of the dance ended. Hawken stood still again and stared at her until she glanced round and said clearly, "I need a cool drink, I believe." And Hawken jumped and led her away, so that now, with his attention caught and a chance to talk to him privately, the girl of the dark would have a willing hearer. Will felt suddenly sickened by the approaching treachery and listened no more. He found Merriman beside him, still gazing black into space.